Hello class, this is Mr. Graziano. This is part 3 of watercolor technique. I decided to move outside because it's super nice. So I'm in the courtyard at school. You can kind of see here, beautiful. Anyhow, here's my watercolor technique, and what you're going to do this time is I want you to take this sheet and I want you to put a darker value on one of these. So for example, what you're going to do is if I want a dark blue, I'll mix up my blue here. Here's some blue, and I'll test that out. And I can see it's pretty light. So I'm gonna make it a little more concentrated by adding a little bit more blue to that and not any more water. And I'll test that out again. And I can see that it's pretty good. Okay, now I'm gonna add a little black to this because I want a navy blue. So I just cleaned off my brush. I'll put this here. So clean off the brush, clean it off on paper towel, and now I'm gonna switch to some black. Here's some black that I previously had here. I'm gonna mix a little bit of that black with my blue, and I'll test that out, and I can see I got a pretty dark navy blue, okay? So what I'm gonna do now here, once again, let's bring my paper towels over so you can see them. I'm gonna zoom out just a tad, okay? So what I'm gonna do here is I've got my navy blue that I mixed up. I tested out, looks pretty good. I'm gonna put navy blue on a crescent moon-like shape right over here, okay? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna quick clean my brush, dry my brush, and then I'm gonna soften this edge again so it fades from a navy blue to a regular blue, okay? And then what I'll do is probably clean my brush again, dry it again, and even fade that area. So that's how you get a gradual value change or a gradual fade, okay? Now, next thing, how to get technique where you get details. Let's say I was working on this flower here, and I want to make that flower look a little more three-dimensional. So what I've done is I first laid down my lightest colors, like this light yellow. Then I started laying some darker oranges over the top and browns and golds. Now let's say I want to put this a little further back. So what I'm going to do this time is I want to take a gold, but if I take my gold here, my gold's pretty yellow, okay? I want that to be darker, so don't mix black with gold. Remember, take brown. So I'll take a little brown, mix that with my gold, try that out. Now I've got a little darker gold there. And you know what? I want it to be even darker. Little darker gold. Now I might even say, you know what? I still don't think, I think I want a darker brown still. So I'm grabbing some brown from up here. I'm gonna add that to that, so it's really kind of a golden brown now instead of more of a yellow. And it looks like I got a little too much brown in there. I'm gonna grab some more yellow from up here and add a little more yellow to that. And I'll try that out. And it's pretty dark. So in an area like this, I might come back in here. Let's zoom out a little bit. I might come back in and just put some darker color right in there. Okay, and then I'll fade that out. So I'll go like so, and there's a ridge here, but maybe I fade out this area. So once again, clean my brush, okay, dry it on the paper towel, and I'm gonna take this again, and I'm going to fade this just a little bit better. Okay, next, if I've got watercolors and I really want a lot of texture, okay, so let me show you an example real quick. It's a little windy out here, so I gotta move some things. But for example, here I showed you this tiger earlier. Let's say I got texture like this. Okay, you can see there's a lot of texture in that tiger. So what we did is we laid colors down and then we put strokes back over the top of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is, let's say I want to get a little texture on, oh, let's go with this. So I'm going to go and get my brush real skinny now. How do I do that? Well, what I can do is this. If I brush my watercolors on a scrap piece of paper, so I'm going to take my watercolors, and here's my navy blue, and I'm going to put that on a scrap. Now I'm going to take my brush and kind of go back and forth with it. When I go back and forth, it flattens the bristles out. See it right here? Like here, the bristles are wide, and here they're a little skinnier. So now I'm going to use that skinny, and I'm going to add some texture to this. So I'm going to come back in here. It's sort of like if I was using a little pen. I'm going to add texture over the top of this. Okay, now in this area, the texture kind of disappears because it's in the dark part. So maybe I'll go straight to a black here, and I'll test that out. And I'm going to add some black texture to this. So it's just like if we're using pastels, you're gonna overlap. You're gonna overlap the texture. Okay, next, sometimes you want white highlights. Like you might do a painting. Oh, I got one in here. Let's see if I can grab it real quick. Like this one here. Now I want some areas that are light. I want white spots. Now, is there such thing as white watercolors? There is, and it's right here. But I'm not a huge fan of the white watercolor because it's not very opaque. So I don't want to use very much water at all. But what I can do is take that white watercolor, and I'm going to take a test strip here. This already has colors on it. I'm just going to test to see how opaque that white is. It seems to show up pretty good, but realize watercolors, as they dry, they're going to fade a little bit. So those white strokes are probably going to fade a little bit, but it's right now it's pretty good. So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to add some white strokes over the top of that apple. They're pretty fat, but you get the idea. So that's how you do texture. Obviously, if you wanted lines thinner than this, you can make your brush really thin or really small. And just like with watercolors, with pastel, I can add other colors to this. So let's say that I'm just going to reactivate some green over here. Here's a little green. Not very much. Let's just take a little bit more here. I'll take a little green out of here. I'll put it in the tray right up here. I'll test it out. Yeah, it's kind of green. Okay, excuse me. And a little more green. So grab a little more out of here, and I'm gonna add that back to there. And let's try that. So you might have subjects where you have multiple colors overlapping, which I love. So I'm just gonna put a little hint of green in here. And now up close, you can't really tell much of a difference from far away, but up close you can see a little bit of that green in there. Okay, see a little bit of the green. It's hard to see from far away, but it's very subtle. So in watercolors, once again, just like if you're painting, you don't want it to be like a coloring book and just fill an apple in red and call it quits. You want to over a lot of color in there. So this particular flower, you can see how we added some white spots in some areas. These areas here, I just left those alone. Okay, and then I'm going to add shadows. So for example, sometimes I'll come back in and I may outline things. So here's another picture of a flower here. And sometimes I just want to make things pop a little bit more. So maybe I'll take almost black straight out of here, and I'll test that out. And that could be a little darker. Let me grab some more black out of here. Here's the black again. I'll grab a little black here, bring it back into my tray. Let's test it out. Okay, that's pretty dark. I could come back in here, let's say on this thing, and maybe just right here in this little ridge, I'm going to add just a little bit of black just so I can make that ridge pop a little bit more. And do that same thing here, or maybe the edge of a leaf. I'm just going to put a little black in here just to define an edge a little bit. Now I might then clean my brush. I just cleaned it, and now I'm going to fade that edge just a little bit. So I've just darkened the edge and kind of got rid of my line and made it more like the edge just gets darker. Okay, so that's how you get little fine details. And I can do the same thing with my white watercolor. Okay, so once again, white watercolor. Make sure your brush is clean. You don't want to contaminate the white. The white's just a little bit damp right now, just a little bit. It's not real liquidy, and this is one of the few colors I usually paint directly out of here because I don't want it to lessen. And then what I'm going to do is just test it out in here. Here's a green area. Let's see how that looks. So yeah, I can get a little bit of an edge there with my white. So I'm going to go in here on this plant, and maybe I'm going to make this pop a little bit more. I'm going to put a little white right here on that little area that's in the middle. And maybe along some of these leaves, I'm going to have some white highlights. Now, I got a feeling that this white, it looks okay right now, but it's going to fade and it's going to be almost unnoticeable. So that's where sometimes I will use acrylic paint. So here's a big jug of acrylic paint. Okay, now what I had is this jug has been stored upside down, so the paint's near the cap. Now what I'm going to just do here is I'm going to unscrew the cap, and you're going to see some paint right there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab a little bit of that white paint and put it in the tray here. But now keep in mind, this paint, if it's too thick, it'll dry in your tray and you won't be able to clean it up. So I'm going to take a little bit of this paint out of here and put it right there. Okay, so now I've got a little bit of white paint. Now this stuff's thicker and it's a little bit more opaque, but it does thin with water. But obviously, if I wanted to thin it with water, I would just use the watercolor white. So that's all I need is that little bit there. I'm gonna put the cap back on the bottle. And once again, I like to store these bottles upside down so that it's always keep the paint near the cap. Okay, now let's try that out again. I'm gonna take a little bit of this white. I'm gonna try it on this, and you can see that's a little bit thicker, a little more opaque. I think it's gonna pop a little bit more. You can add a little water, but when I add a little water, let me just show you how to do that. I'm literally just barely touching my brush in there. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of water, because I add too much water, it's gonna become too transparent and it's gonna get too watered down. So let's test it out again. Okay, not too bad. So now if I go back to this leaf and I really want that white to pop, I'll go back in there and I will make this white just really pop a little bit more. It's more like an opaque white, it's not so transparent. Okay, so sometimes when I want to do white, sometimes I will paint around it, like this one. I just painted around this and left it white. It's a little tricky to do sometimes, but so what I can't do that, then I'll take some acrylic paint, and I might come in here and just put some highlights on here with that acrylic paint. And the key with painting, I really think, is contrast. Most kids are too afraid to make, like if they do a flower, they'll just make the whole thing pink. But look at the difference between this really dark to very light. And also I have other colors in there. So there's yellow, hints of yellow in here. Okay? So that's our next technique in watercolor. What I want you to do is this. I want you to, with these 6 large apples, I want you to paint dark purple here, dark red here, dark orange, dark gold, dark green, dark blue, and then one of them, I want you to cover it with texture, sort of like it's covered with fur or some kind of texture like that with a brush. I don't really care what you do with these middle ones. You can do whatever you want. And then the last thing, just to show you got a little control of your brush, I'd like you to paint your name up here. So this is where I'll take my black watercolor and I'll just get it a little bit wet, so it's almost like black ink, and I'll test it out on my paper, okay? Now this isn't my paper, and hopefully she won't get too mad at me, but you would paint your name right up here, okay? So on your paper, here's my paper. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make my brush real thin. If you wanna make your brush thin, brush it back and forth first to flatten out that brush, so you got a skinny brush, and then I'm gonna go here and paint Mr. Graz. Got it? So show that you can control the brush. Like so. So put your name on the top like that. So once again, I want all those filled out. I want the large apples, dark purple, dark red, dark orange, dark yellow, dark green, dark blue on one side fading, and then I want you to add texture to at least one of those apples to show me you can control that. And then I want you to paint your name somehow on the top with a small black brush, okay, with black on a small brush. Got that? That's it for today.